Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Guess what? We survived Mortal Kombat. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm talking about the eclipse. We survived. Nothing was going to happen. This was anyone who knows anything about astronomics and physics and knows the way things move in the world. You're reading between the lines. We're fine. Okay. That said, I had a very good conversation with a very good friend who's new in my life. We're talking about the love of guns. Why we love guns sometimes more than we love people. And you know what? I had to think about that a little bit because, I love guns. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I'm passionate about this subject. That's why I'm so staunch of a supporter of the 2A, is because this is one of your God-given rights, one of your natural rights to defend and protect yourself. But why do I like guns specifically? I've spoke about this a little bit, bits and pieces here and there. For me, it's the connection. Knowing that there wasn't very long ago, a couple thousand years ago, a bow was considered state of the art, or an atlatl. It isn't within the last 200 years that you start seeing firearms come into play, and the radical changes that have come from firearms, and what that change has brought to the world. Some good, some pleasant, some bad, a lot of bad. It's all the intent behind the person that drives what the firearm does. That's one thing that a lot of people don't understand. The gun is just a tool, right? You need to have some skills. You need to be the person that sets events in motion to make things go. For me, it's the craftsmanship. A lot of people, myself included, I'm a car guy, a gun guy, a watch guy, a knife guy, anything with craftsmanship. Up until in my personal life and my career, I look at the craftsmanship of how things are made, the interfaces for technology, how people program what are called graphical user interfaces, because it tells you what they were thinking in a roundabout way. And I love that same story that goes into each and every firearm that I have been exposed to. Each person had this idea. They were inspired to build something. A couple hundred years ago, it was wood and steel, or metal, iron. Now you have polymer plastics and steel and aluminum and other composites that are in this. And for me, it's always the science of how they made these things and how they created and put these parts together, and the craftsmanship that actually went into it. If you look at the older guns like my Luger, and that there was thousands of machine processes to get that block of steel where it is now, and that connection to knowing those processes and seeing on some firearms, not necessarily on my Luger, seeing machine marks and seeing that there was hand fitting done to make these pieces finally go together. Those all make up a story and a tapestry, a mosaic of art to me, and that's how I see firearms. I look at modern firearms and I see that some of that's still there because there's a lot of craftsmanship that went into it. There's a lot of know-how to program those machines to do exactly what they're doing to get this fine product, this very fine piece in detail done. And, that speaks volumes to me, because if you think about, I've said this again, what we deal with is we're containing miniature explosions very close to your face, and to have this working piece of machinery that the metallurgy was sound enough to where it'll contain that explosion, one. Two, that it is continually functioning. It does what it's supposed to. It does its intended purpose, whether this is a hunting rifle or whether this is a weapon of war that is a collector's piece, like my Mausers. I look at those pieces of how it all got put together. I look at the story of how these pieces came together. There's a reason why German-made Mausers for World War II have blonde stocks, and it's because it's actually a composite piece of plywood, basically, because aging walnut takes time, and when you're spinning up a war machine, you don't have time on your side. You need to start producing these tools as rapidly as you can. And it's knowing those stories that always connects me. It's the same thing when I look at the Kalashnikov. This is a story of a tank mechanic that turned into a gun designer. And he said something very profound that I used to have on my staff webpage where I used to work. And it's like, all things that are simple are useful, and those things that are complicated aren't. And that rings true in my professional life as well as everything else, as I try to keep things as simple as I can because they work. And that's the story I like seeing in firearms. I like looking at, sighting systems. Why were these sighting systems chosen over this one? If you look in Western weapons, we use peep sights or we use aperture sights. Where if you look at the earlier Eastern weapons, they don't have those. They have barleycorn, leaf sights and posts. And where we graduated to that finer aperture sight, why? It improved accuracy, but it took iterations of different designs from the M1 all the way up till now to figure that out. Fast forward to modern optics. Why are modern optics such a great tool for you? For someone of my age who has not the greatest eyesight, it puts me back on the same level as I once was with open sights. This weekend I did go out and I put a few rounds down even though it was windy, because I'm still trying to get ready to maybe take on that 500-yard challenge with an open-sighted rifle. And it made me, yet again, re-engage with the things I love. I look at roller-delayed guns like the MP5 or the G3 style rifles, and knowing the history of where that original bolt design comes from. It comes from the MG42. It was a way to make something inexpensive that was needed in a pinch, and that's usually what happens with weapons innovation, is that wars start. And because of wars, necessity is a mother of invention, that people start doing different things. If it weren't for people looking at making a profit, firearms wouldn't exist, okay? But you also look at what they did there. I mean, you look at the early gun designs. If you've ever watched Ian from Forgotten Weapons and seen some of the early designs of firearms, and you can see the iterative process that we as humans came to build to lead up to the new stuff that we're using. And that story is what connects me, what starts a love affair that started very young for me, or ignited a passion for me. And what started my love of firearms is that story, learning the history of how they got from point A to point B to point C, and how we're still evolving those pieces beyond. I think that where I see innovation starting to happen is with material science. Ammunition is heavy. If you've ever had to carry lots of ammunition, you know how heavy it is. And anytime you could lighten that weight, you're improving someone's life, whether it's militarily or hunting-wise. A 308 round doesn't seem like it weighs that much until you carry 1,000 of them. And then you realize just how heavy that much actually adds up. That little bit of weight adds up. Same thing goes with firearms. You look at the M1 Garand, it is a marvelous machine until you start holding an AR-15 and you realize that there was material science that improved the situation here, but also design changes were made to accomplish the end goal of making a more user-friendly, more carryable, more usable gun. The same thing happens in all technology. And that's what I am, is I'm a technologist. I'm someone that looks at technology and looks at the logistical trains of how things get built, how things end up to get the end product. And that's always been a fuel or a fire that's lit to me with firearms. You look at all those pieces parts. Paul Mauser, I know a little bit about his story. I've read a lot about Mauser. He lost an eye because a gun blew up, and it changed his modern design philosophy towards different firearms. And if you look at the G41, you'll see there's a reason why it's built the way it is. It's because he was trying to improve design and safety. And if you look at the old Berthier rifles, the French Berthiers, you look at them and you see they could be better, and Mauser made them better. Everybody took iterative design pieces and made them better and improved it and went forward. You look at the Colt Single Action Army, it's an iteration of the Colt, the Walker Colt, the black powder Colt. It wasn't until cartridges came into play that started making the Colt more of a user-friendly gun, because now you're not having to load 6 rounds with a ramrod that's attached to the gun and put a charge in each one. It makes it more usable, more serviceable for what you need. And it dominated the West for a long time. And that's the story of humanity. If you look at history, it's tied to weapons whether you like it or not. And that's kind of being a student of human nature and being a student of history. That could be why I'm tied to firearms so much in a lot of ways. But then I look at the individual designs, the individual gun itself. You look at Kalashnikov, he took a piece of flat steel and he was trying to get it pressed into a receiver that didn't work, and Russian economics and know-how didn't allow that to happen, so he had to make it the first versions of the Kalashnikov were solid steel pieces that were machined to make the receiver. Knowing that story, though, that the AKM came about because they were looking for a cheaper way, more economic way to make the Kalashnikov rifle. You look at Eugene Stoner and the AR class of firearms. Material science advanced enough, and now we realize that you didn't need to have something that was steel. You could do it with aluminum. It had the tensile strength, and it had the capability of containing the force of an explosion, and was easier to machine and cheaper, and it made the gun lighter by consequence. And then he looked at, well, why do we put wood on firearms? Because, wood molds and mildews. What other new materials do we have? And he started looking at plastics and polymers. And now you look at modern gun designs like the Glock pistol, which is considered modern, even though it's not that modern. I mean, the first polymer frame pistol was actually an HK, I believe. And you start looking at what we were doing as humans to get to this place. Part of it is material science, and part of it is the ingenuity and the grace and the sheer knowledge and know-how that God's been given to people to make these devices. And while it may seem like this is all focused towards destruction, it's not. An archer, that was a weapon of war at one time, but now archery is an Olympic sport, so shooting. It's what you do with the skill and what you do with the tool. So where some people see weapons of war that are just capable killing machines that are just going to wipe the floor with people and that leave trails of blood everywhere, it's not what I see with firearms, and it's never been what I've seen with them. I've seen it as a tool, just like a ratchet or any other wrench that you need in your toolkit to accomplish a goal. For me, for a large chunk of my life, it's been hunting. Now, as I've gotten older and gotten more into the stuff, I'm not so much a hunter, but I am very much into defending myself and my family and my community, which means that the tools change a little bit for the role. You don't use a hammer to turn a screw. You use the correct tool for the right application. The same thing goes in the 2A world. And that's the passion that I hope I speak about when you're listening to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I get stuck in those political holes, and I'm trying to separate myself a little bit from that because it's kind of circular lately. You see ups and downs. You see that they're consistently trying to take away that God-given right to defend yourself, and they're not understanding the science and the beauty of what this thing is and what it actually means to some people. Those of us that were raised around firearms our entire life have a different understanding of these. It's just like farmers. Farmers know where food comes from. You talk to a really dyed-in-the-wool city boy that has never been outside of the city, and you ask him where milk comes from or where meat comes from, and he's going to tell you it came from the store. But does he know how it actually got there? And that's part of the love affair I have with firearms, is knowing how these weapons came to be, what made them so unique and special, and why they each have their own individual story. That's one of the reasons why I like Ian from Forgotten Weapons, is because he does go off on those tangents and tell you what the iterative process is. And not just him, Othias and everybody else, all the guys in the, collector spaces, in the gun tuber space, the collector world is what I'd call them. They actually are the ones that are telling you the story. And that draws me to it. But I also like the practicality of someone like Mr. Guns and Gear or Iraq Vet 8888. When these guys, Robski from AKOU, they show you the practical purposes of these firearms and what they actually do, the modern ones. Robski's gotten into a lot of long-range shooting because he is a sniper, an Army sniper, and his daughter and they have a channel that's dedicated to vintage shooting rifles, and I've kind of dug on that because there's not been as much AKOU content coming out. And that's because the AK is kind of getting expensive, and it's no longer the peasant's rifle in the United States. It's becoming a rich man's gun. And that's kind of sad in a lot of ways, because we're going to deprive a lot of people of that connection to their firearm. It's being supplemented or supplanted by the AR-15. The AR-15, by all measures nowadays, is the American prepper's gun. It is the American rifle. It's the quintessential American rifle, in my opinion. And that's because of its design, its capability, its functionality. It reflects American culture in a lot of ways. And not necessarily in bad ways, and not necessarily always in good ways. The rugged durability of some of the other designs from Europe and from the East aren't reflected in the AR-15, because we kind of have that mentality that if it's broken, we can just replace it. In some cases, that's very much a good thing. In other cases, it's not necessarily the best thing. And, that's a reflection of our culture, kind of reflected in a firearm. Those are those little telltale signs that I always see in messing around with a 2A. If you look at the early guns that came from Europe to the United States, there's different designs and different intents. We had buffalo hunting rifles while they were using bolt-action rifles in Europe. Why? Well, they were prepping for war. They needed faster action than we need to hunt buffalo here. Then you look at American designers that started making lever-action guns to be more ready for other game and for basically conquering the West, because that's what we did. The firearm fit the role, and that's how things kind of roll in the 2A community. But that's, I guess, how I connect the dots or build that bridge, as I've been told I do often, of my passions and where my passions come from in the 2A world, is that I look at each one of these marvelous pieces of equipment, even the ones that we would all think are kind of garbage, and understand what the role and purpose of those things are. Like, share, subscribe, most importantly, be great and be passionate about what you love.